Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to Kabbalah Cafe this morning. This is lesson 304. And in the old days, when people used to travel by airplane, just a few months back, one of the unofficial, unannounced realities was that when the plane would land, everyone would get into this race of who can get to the luggage carousel first. And it's this, as soon as the airplane lands, of course, it's a mad rush. Everyone's trying to get out first. And when you're traveling in the airport, sometimes you get an option when there's a long walk where they have a moving floor. And you can get on the moving floor. And of course, if you want to get there faster, the moving floor sometimes can help you. But of course, if you stay still on the moving floor, it's still faster to walk on the side of it. So in life too, we can walk on our own, or we can walk with the moving floor. Walking with the moving floor is that when we have the aid and the insight of the Kabbalah and the spiritual teachings that give us the tactics and the techniques, this is like a moving floor. It doesn't mean that we don't have to walk. We still have to walk, but when we walk with the moving floor, we end up walking a lot faster. One of the great expressions, I'm going to mute everyone just to start, and then we'll unmute for a few times for questions. Okay. So one of the great expressions is that in life, challenges are not in the way, they are the way. This is sounds like a cliche, a self-help, positive thinking approach, but I'd like to share the Kabbalah's perspective on this concept that in life, challenges are not in the way, they are the way. We are just a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah. It is the custom at this time for many people that they begin to blow the shofar every single day as a reminder that the new year is about to begin, the Jewish New Year is about to begin. And of course, the shofar reminds us of this because the way in which we usher in the new year in Jewish tradition is with the blowing of the shofar. And the question is why? Why is it that the Jewish New Year, the beginning of a new year, is symbolized and we usher in the new year with this act of blowing a horn? What is the significance? What is the meaning behind this? Why do we do this? So I'd like to share just various different perspectives and then get into what the Kabbalah says on a Kabbalistic level. So number one is that the concept of blowing of the shofar really is the act of listening. As I've mentioned before, if you actually take a look at the blessing that we make when we blow the shofar, the blessing is not that God has commanded us to blow the shofar. The blessing is God has commanded us to hear the voice of the shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. And the act of listening is spiritually the fundamental and most important act symbolically in our spiritual quest. Because as we've taught many times before, the essence of our battle, spiritual battle in this world, is the battle between self-orientation and selflessness, self-transcendence. Is my life ultimately about myself and the focus is myself and my needs? Or do I understand that I am here to serve something beyond myself? That is the essence of the spiritual quest and the spiritual battle, to overcome our natural tendency to be self-involved and to learn what it means to transcend self. This is the ultimate challenge and battle that we have in life. And the act of listening is really the deepest and most powerful way to represent this idea that we are putting ourselves aside and making space for another perspective, to hear another viewpoint. We're making space for another, whether it is for God and to hear God's message, for another human being. But the act of listening is the primal and the most fundamental way in which we make room for others and we make space for others in our lives. And so Judaism says that if we're going to begin our year, we need to begin our year with the spiritual foundation for our whole spiritual quest of the year, which begins, again, simply with the act of listening. When we listen, we're making a statement. There is someone else. There is something else. There is another perspective. It also says, I don't know everything. Someone can teach me something. It's an act of humility. It's an act of selflessness, of putting oneself aside. When we speak, we are projecting ourselves. When we listen, we are making space for another. We are making space for another entity in our life. And so being that this is the essence of our spiritual battle, the battle between the godly soul and the animal soul is not a listener. The animal soul only has its perspective. It's not interested in another perspective. It's me, it's I, it's self-orientation. The godly soul, by definition, is a listener. It's ready to receive. It's ready to hear. It wants to hear the message of God. It wants to hear what other people's needs are. It wants to know how other people feel, and so on and so forth. It is, by definition, sees things beyond itself. It is here not just for itself. So this is one of the messages and one of the reasons why we begin our year, and the foundation of our year begins with this act of the listening of the shofar. There is another concept, and we're going to cover a few different concepts today, and that is that the shofar is understood to be an alarm clock. When you're sleeping, you need an alarm clock to wake you up. And it says in Kabbalah that we begin our year with an alarm to awaken us from our spiritual slumber. What do we mean by our spiritual slumber? That in life, sometimes it is easy to become distracted and to kind of lose our way when it comes to our sense of purpose and mission. We become distracted by our material pursuits. We become distracted by the world that we live in. And we sometimes can easily forget why we are here, what is our purpose, and we can drift. We can have what we call mission drift, where we drift away from our essential mission. This happens a lot in life. And sometimes when we are in this spiritual slumber, we need to be awakened. We need something to arouse us. And that the call of the shofar symbolically represents this alarm. It's an alarm to awaken people from their spiritual slumber, not a physical slumber, though there are times where people fall asleep in the synagogue too, physically, but I'm talking about a spiritual slumber where a person really is kind of out of touch with their sense of purpose and mission in this world. They've kind of gotten distracted. They're busy with other things, and their life for a while, whether it's been a short while, long while, has been about non-spiritual matters, not connected with their sense of purpose and mission, and they need something to awaken them from this spiritual slumber. So that is another concept, another symbolism, and why it is that we begin the foundation of a new year with the blowing of the shofar. Again, first of all, it is an act of listening, which is an act of humility, which is the essence of our spiritual quest to become selfless, to transcend self. And number two, it is simply an alarm. It is a way to arouse us from our spiritual slumber. Number three, another concept that is behind, and the reason why the shofar is the way in which we begin a new year, is that we begin each year as a time for reflection and a time for what we call reflection and self-correction, returning back to where we're supposed to be. It is a time in which we look back at the year past, say maybe there were certain things where we weren't true to ourselves or true to God or true to our purpose and mission, as we mentioned before, and we are really trying to correct these things. We're trying to think about how we can make the next year better. It's a season for reflection and self-correction, or we call it returning to our path. Now, the question is, if we've not been true to this path, it's because we've chosen and have wanted to live otherwise. That's why we may have lived differently or made different choices, because we decided that we want other things in our life. Now, the question is, if that's the case, why are we reflecting? Why do we have this sense of regret? Why do we feel that we need to do better? And Kabbalah says that is because human beings are complicated. We are multi-layered beings. There are parts of us that want, right? Or we can talk about animal soul, godly soul, or different layers. We have more external layers that sometimes want more superficial things in life, that are more attracted to the immediate gratification that we might get from material things, from honor and power and money and so on and so forth. These are immediate gratifications that speak to a more external part of our souls. But there is a deeper part of our souls that's very, very deep, that really does want something more in life, that is seeking something greater in life. And this deepest part of ourselves, we're told in Kabbalah, is sometimes such a deep part of ourselves that we're not in touch with it a lot. It's dormant. And the proof is that weeks, months, and years can go by sometimes where a person leads a life that is totally superficial, that is without a sense of spirituality and meaning, and they're fine with it. It just doesn't really, it's not something that really bothers them or they think about or reflect on, because these deeper convictions, where a person wants a connection, where a person wants truth and they want a connection to something higher, lays dormant. It is something that is in our essence and is dormant, and it represents our deepest sentiments. And Kabbalah says sometimes the things that are so deep within us, we can't really even find words to express. There are sentiments that we can, if you ask someone, can you express that? Put that into words. Could you say that? So sometimes we have the ability to express certain sentiments in words. There are some sentiments and some feelings that are so deep that we really can't even find the words to express them. That's why music plays such an important role in spirituality, because sometimes with music and with tunes and with sounds, and sometimes using lyrics within music, but specifically the music itself, the sound of the music itself, sometimes can give expression to some of the deepest parts of ourselves that we can't really express in regular words. That's why it says that music, in Hasidic teachings, it says that music is the pen of the soul. That sometimes if you want to express something from the deepest part of yourself, you express it through music rather than through words. And that's really another symbolism of the shofar being a primal just cry, so to speak, just a note, a sound that is very primitive and very primal, represents the cry from the essence of the soul, to which we don't even have words. It is such a deep longing, so to speak, for God. It is such a deep desire for meaning and purpose that lies at our very core. It's something that we can't really necessarily even express in words. We express it through a simple cry, a simple shout. Sometimes when a person's in tremendous pain or in tremendous joy, they can just shout for joy. They don't even have like a word to say. It's just like they just react with a sound, with a shout, or whatever it may be. That's what the shofar represents. It represents the primal voice and sound of the essence of the soul that is so deep that we don't have words for it. We just have a sound for it. That's all we can give it, is a sound. And that's what the shofar represents. Our deepest sentiments, the calling from the deepest parts of our hearts. And that's, again, why we begin our year with that, because, of course, we want to start our year on the right foot, connected and being in touch with the deepest parts of ourselves, because so much of our time and so much of our year, we are not in touch with that deepest core of ourselves. We're living life more in connected with outer layers of our soul. And so again, the shofar is about that deepest call from the most primal parts of our soul that can't be expressed in words. It's just a note. It's just a shriek, a cry from the essence of the soul. So before we go on to the next level, just to see if there's any questions, I'll just unmute if there's any questions that anyone has at this time. Any questions or any clarifications that someone would like to make? Okay. So again, so far, we have three things that we've spoken about what is the deeper meaning of the shofar, and why is it that the Jewish year is such that this is the way we usher in a new year. Either, again, it is an expression of listening. The mitzvah is to listen to the shofar, which is an expression of deep humility and selflessness, and it's the statement that there is someone or something else besides myself that I'm receiving from, and this lies at the essence of our spiritual quest. Number two is the concept of an alarm that awakens us from our spiritual slumber, because sometimes we do get distracted and we do fall asleep spiritually, and we need to be awakened. And then finally, that this is an expression of our deepest sentiments, from which we are expressing our deepest desires and deepest sentiments, which we're usually not in touch with. And that's what the shofar represents, a call without words that is so primal and so deep that all we can express it in is with a cry, so to speak, from the heart. There is now, I'd like to share with you a deeper concept that is based on the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah says that each year, as we begin a new year, we also usher in a brand new energy into the world. In other words, it's not just a time in the calendar. It's not just happens to be the Jewish New Year and we're going to commemorate certain historical events and call it a New Year's, but actually, in fact, it's new in the sense that it brings a new energy into the world. That's what makes it new. What makes it new is that each year, there is a brand new energy that's brought into the world. In other words, when God signs his leases, he only signs 1-year leases. So he signs a 1-year lease with the world, and then it's up for renewal. He said, okay, well, let's renew the lease. When he renews the lease each year, it's with a brand new energy. It's a brand new energy that the world has never seen before. The world has never seen that energy. It's a brand new energy, and it comes into the world. It's interesting to note that is the reason why, according to Kabbalah, we say everything is decided in Rosh Hashanah, because with that new energy, the potential and the reality of everything that's going to be in that year is contained in that new energy. So as that new energy comes into the world, everything that new energy is going to bring to our world is also contained in that. And therefore, for example, last year, Rosh Hashanah, it was already, as I've mentioned, it was already in the energy of that year, for this past year, for there to be a COVID, for there to be a pandemic, and for everything that's surrounding that. So there is a concept that is a new energy, and it's a new energy that the world hasn't seen before, and that's the way we usher in a new year. It's also very important because the Kabbalah says this is why we are not essentially prisoners of the past. A lot of people say, I've always been this way, or my life has always been this way, and it always will be this way. I'm a prisoner of my past. Whatever the past has been, that's what the future is going to be. And all of us, on some level, are guilty of that mindset, whereby if I've not been able to do something in the past, I'm not going to be able to do it in the future. If this is who I've been in the past, this is who I'm going to be in the future. And we kind of get boxed into a certain mindset where we become prisoners of the past. So Kabbalah says that every year there's a new energy in the world. This new energy gives us new abilities, new potential, new realities, new possibilities. Things that were not possible in the past become possible. And so therefore, the fact that until now we weren't able to do something, it's a brand new world. It's a brand new reality. It's a brand new energy, says the Kabbalah. We are drawing down a new energy into our world. And therefore, that's what makes it a new year. Again, it's not just a time. That's not just a new year because we've chosen it to be the new year, and that it's subjectively a time for reflection to mark a new year, but that it is essentially new because there's a new energy. There's a new energy coming into this world. There's a new godly energy that we are bringing into this world, and therefore, it is considered Rosh Hashanah, the head of the new year. Now, when Kabbalah talks about energy coming to this world, as we've said many times before, the way that energy flows into this world, which is the act of creation, where energy is flowing into this world, as we've said many, many times before, it goes through a system in order to come into this world. Because God's light is too intense and too great and too overwhelming to coexist and to exist in our reality, we are a limited, finite reality, and therefore God's light would be too much, would be overwhelming for us to be able to exist in. We wouldn't exist as physical beings with our limited perspective and with our self-awareness, essentially, if we wouldn't be able to do so if God's energy would be totally present in this world. It would overwhelm the world. It is too much energy. So the whole flow of energy into this world is one in which the energy first has to be constricted. It has to be limited. And that constriction and limitation is what allows for creation to come into reality. And we find this, of course, examples of this, as we've given many times before. For example, when you're dealing with a teacher who's trying to teach a student information, the teacher, who may have been much wiser and has a tremendous amount of information on something, when they begin teaching the child, they can't give them all the information at once, because that is just overwhelming, and the child's just going to shut down and not be able to take that information. Rather, the teacher has to constrict the information, limit it to a very simple idea to begin with, and then feed that simple idea. And from that simple idea, we can build new ideas. So if we're starting to teach math, we may want to teach the child 1 + 1 = 2. From that concept, we can begin building new things, but we can't take a first grader and say, let's start now with algebra. let's start, it's too much information. There's no way they can handle that. It's over the top. Their vessel, their container cannot contain that. And we talk about that with everything in life, that we have to limit it and constrict it relative to what we're trying to achieve. This is the way God created the world. The energy has to pass through a state of constriction in order for it to be able to create. And so really, in a certain sense, there's an irony here, or it's so to speak, counterintuitive, that to create, we actually have to diminish first. We diminish, then we can create. It's not what you would expect. If you're creating, it should be a positive flow of energy, but it turns out that we first have to constrict in order to create. Or think about the concept of, for example, if you need to build a new house and your old house is too small, you have to knock down the old house to build a new house. That act of knocking down the old house, right, to make space for the bigger house, is an act of destruction, but it really isn't, because it's a destruction in order to create. We're trying to create something new. If I'm trying to, for example, create a new paradigm, I have to, so to speak, break the old paradigm in order to open myself up to a new paradigm. If I'm stuck in the old paradigm, I'm not ready and I'm not receptive to a new paradigm. So this is the way God creates the world, as a constriction. And then that constriction allows us to make space for, and allows for the reality of a creation. And of course, as we've mentioned before, this is called tzimtzum. This is called contraction and constriction of God's light. And the Kabbalah speaks about this extensively, many different layers of this, many different ways in which this is expressed, and how this plays out. Again, even as human beings, when we take a very, very abstract idea and then bring that idea into action, it's really an act of constriction. We're taking something that's very lofty and very sublime, and we slowly but surely have to constrict it and bring it down into a concrete reality. This is the way that we are made in the image of God. Same concept. So in Kabbalah, it says that the way in which we usher in a new year, and the way in which we not only usher in a new year, but with that usher in a new energy into this world, a new creative energy, is with blowing the shofar. Because what is the blowing of the shofar? The blowing of a shofar as a wind instrument, by definition, as I've mentioned, is air. How is the sound created? The sound is created because the air has to pass through a constricted space and then opens up into a wider space. That's how wind instruments make their sounds. That's how a shofar works. It's a very primal wind instrument, the shofar, very primitive, very, very primitive wind instrument. But a wind instrument, by definition, is one in which the air passes through a constricted passage and then opens up to a wider passage. It is that change from the constricted passage to the wider passage that makes the noise, right? If you take a pipe and it's the same size from beginning to end and you blow through it, there's no noise made. But if you take something where there's a smaller space and then it opens up to a wider space, you get the noise. That's how the noise is made. In other words, the idea of the shofar is in many ways symbolic of the new energy coming into our world. It's symbolic that there's a constriction that allows for something wider, something greater to come about, that allows for that sound to come out. First there's the constriction, then there's the wider space. So when we are bringing this new energy into our world, which comes in a way of first constriction and then opens up into creation, into reality, we do it with an act that does exactly that. It's a constriction, and then the air passes into a wider space. That is the act in which we usher in the new year. And in fact, in Kabbalah, it says that it is when we blow the shofar that we usher that new energy into this world. And it, again, is because the blowing of the shofar is very much consistent with the way the shofar is blown is very much consistent with the way that energy flows into this world of constriction. And from that place of constriction, we end up, we come into a wider space, we come into a wider reality, we can come into a new reality, something can be created. But it's first got to go through a constriction. The air has to be constricted first in order for it to come to that wider space and to make the sound of the shofar. So that's, the Kabbalah says, is the deeper Kabbalistic reason we blow shofar, to usher in a new year. What does that mean on a practical level? On a practical level, what this really means is that the concept of constriction And from constriction, we come to a place of blessing. From constriction, we come to a place of creation. That system is written into the DNA of our world. It's not just something that can happen. It is written into the DNA of our world. It's the way the world was created. The spiritual DNA of our world is that in order for anything to come about, we have to go through constriction, then we can come to something greater, something more. We have to step back in order to go forward, right? As we've given an example before, if you're standing in front of a large obstacle and you try jumping over it, you can't. What do you have to do? You have to take a few steps back so you can get a running start to jump over. You've got to go back in order to go forward. There has to be a constriction in order to come to something greater. It says in the Talmud that there was one of the great sages who decided to make the move from the Babylonian academies of Talmud to the Jerusalem academies of Talmud. And we're told that the Jerusalem academies, the Israel academies of Talmud, was on a much deeper, higher level. And this particular rabbi said that he would fast. What he did was he fasted for many, many years in order to forget all his studying that he had done in the Babylonian academies in order to be able to obtain his learning in the Jerusalem academies. Why? Because it was a whole new paradigm, a whole new way of thinking of things. And his old way of thinking was not allowing him to be open to this new way of thinking. It was constricting him. And in many ways, so what he had to do is he had to lose that, constrict that, put that aside in order to be open to something new, to something greater. It is written into the spiritual, again, the spiritual DNA of our world is this concept of constriction leads to creation. Constriction of light leads to greater light. And therefore, when we talk about challenge in our world, by definition, it's not just something that is a positive way to look at things, that challenge can lead to opportunity. The very nature of challenge is its very purpose, its very reality is to lead to something greater. Constriction, setback, limitation, its very purpose is to lead to something more, to something greater. That is the whole concept, again, of the blowing of the shofar. The constriction of the air is what allows the noise to be made. It is and again, symbolic of the way that all of the energy comes into our world. Our energy comes into our world through a process of constriction, and then it expands into creation. This is the way the whole world is created, and it is the way the world works. We cannot have redemption unless we have exile first. Exile, limitation, leads to redemption. And therefore, that is the deeper concept behind this idea that challenge in life doesn't get in the way, it is the way. Kabbalah says it is the way of creation, it is the way of life, that there is challenge in order to allow us to achieve something greater. That's how we get to that greater place. That's how we travel there. It's written into the DNA of our world. And of course, this changes our entire perspective, or can enhance our perspective on the challenges that we face in life, whether it is as individuals or as a community or as a global challenge. Challenge by definition is written into the DNA of our world to bring to greater light, to bring to greater blessing. I'll take questions. I know there's one or two people may have questions. Okay. So Margie, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so what you're describing is pretty much the process of childbirth, which I think is, you're doing it in a metaphysical way or a Kabbalistic way. But if you look at it, we're going through constriction, and then you come out, and it's a whole new life. So in that way, when you're saying that Yom Kippur is every year something new, it's like a rebirth.
Correct.
And our souls or our culture or whatever is going through that rebirth and going through the same pain prior to the delivery of a new year. I just made that. This really kept coming to me that was
good. It's good.
Thank you.
Association. It's also interesting to note, as we've mentioned before, that in ancient Hebrew, the word for a birthing stool, which is a stool they used to use to help a midwife would help a woman give birth, that the birthing stool has the same name, is the same word in Hebrew as crisis. So crisis and birthing stool are the same words because that is what crisis is. Crisis is, by definition, the birth of something new. Something, it is allowing us to give birth to something greater, to something new. And it comes through pain. It comes through constriction. And then we're able to achieve something greater. It is the way in which God wrote the DNA, so to speak, when he wrote the software, when he wrote the program of our world. That's the way he wrote the program. He wrote it that way. We have to go through that pain or the constriction or the limitation or the setback in order to reach something new, to reach something greater. And again, that's the deeper symbolism of the shofar, the air in the constricted space and then going to the wider space. Yes, other questions? Okay, so I am going to share the screen here. Okay, so this is Kabbalah Cafe lesson 304, challenge is the way. There are many reasons for ushering in a new year with the blast of the shofar. The act of listening signifies humility and selflessness. It is making room for another and is the essence of our spiritual quest. The shofar is an alarm to awaken us up, to awaken us from spiritual slumber in which we are distracted from our mission and purpose in life. We talk about it being an alarm symbolically. And then, of course, Kabbalah says that each year there's a new energy that flows into our world. That is why all is decided on Rosh Hashanah and that we are not prisoners of the past, because it is a new energy. And it's like a kernel of new energy. And of course, from that kernel, everything comes out. That's why we call it also head of the year, not new year, because head means it directs, it controls the rest of the year. All energy in creation must first be constricted, then it can expand and create. The system of energy flow is symbolized with the constriction expansion of the airflow in the shofar. That's the airflow of the shofar and how the sound is made is a symbol of how energy comes into this world. And this system is written into the DNA of our reality. Challenges are not in the way, they are the way. And of course, it doesn't mean we go looking for challenges, but believe it or not, whether or not we look for it, they will come our way. This is the very nature of life, that challenges will come our way. And if we understand that written into the DNA of this world is that constriction is needed in order to achieve greater light, this of course gives us a much different paradigm when we face those challenges, understanding that those challenges are written into the DNA of our world in order to bring to greater energy. We have to pass the air through a constricted space in order to come to the wider space and to create the sound and the blast of the shofar. Any last questions that anyone has here? Okay, yes, go ahead. Liz, you have to unmute yourself, I think, unless I have to do it.
Got it. Okay. Hi, yes. So when you talk about the rabbi that fasted,
yes,
how long did he fast in order to forget the past?
I don't remember if it was amount of time or something like 90 fasts, 90 different fast days that he did. I don't remember if it was over how long a period of time, but the concept was more, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest that everyone here fast 90 fasts. It may not be very good for you. But the concept really more is sometimes in order to achieve something new, we have to get rid of the old. We have to get out of an old paradigm. We have to kind of get that behind us. You know, when we need to come to something that is not new as in another layer, but is completely on a different level than everything we've experienced till now, we have to kind of break the past in order to move forward with something new. And we find that in people's lives in different areas. The past has to be shattered sometimes in order to achieve something new, a whole new way of approaching life. So this is again, challenge and constriction that leads to greater light.
Rabbi,
yes, Susan.
Oh, go ahead.
Marcia, were you first?
Okay, Marcia, go ahead.
Okay, so to me, it sounds like recovery in addiction.
Yes.
Somebody who is addicted to whatever the substance is, they first have to realize that they are in the throes of an addiction.
Correct.
And they have to come out of it, but to do it is very painful, very uncomfortable, but then
correct.
It's beautiful.
And there's a shattering of the past that has to take place on some level. So that is true in every area of life, that sometimes to get to something new, we have to be able to, we have to overcome challenge and difficulty to reach that new place. Redemption is always preceded by exile. Okay, yes, Susan.
sometimes when we're going through challenges, we sometimes say to ourselves, or I have said it to myself, why is this happening? And so it can be easily interpreted as a punishment, but you're saying that that's not it at all. It's a path that we have to experience so we can get to the other side.
Let me ask you a question. When you discipline a child and you do it in the proper way, what is your goal?
To get
The
them.
goal is to help them get to a new path
Uh-huh.
and to come to a higher realization and a new realization and a higher understanding. So it's not necessarily inconsistent. It's just saying that the challenge itself is there to help me come to a new understanding, but it's all positive. It's all about, we have to go through constriction in order to achieve a higher and new reality.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what do you do in a year such as this year when Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat and you're not able to hear the shofar? How do you come to that realization without having that shrill sound of the shofar?
Right. So two things. Number one is that's why we have a second day of Rosh Hashanah. So that way you can hear the shofar on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And by the way, it's the only holiday on the Jewish calendar where not only usually it's 1 day of holiday in Israel and 2 days in the diaspora. Rosh Hashanah is an exception where even in Israel, it's a 2-day holiday. So Jews around the world, even if you live in the land of Israel, have a second day in which you can hear the shofar on the second day. So that's first of all. Second of all, on a spiritual level, says that really Shabbat itself, if we tap into the energy, has all the messages and all the energy that the shofar usually would bring us to. It's not necessarily something we can expand on now, how that is the case, but the energy of Shabbat itself is such where you don't need the shofar. The shofar sound, if you want to, can be heard every single Shabbat. And so Shabbat provides us with that energy. But again, that's why we have the second day. But I do want to mention also, I think, of course, when we think about globally, when we think about the pandemic, and it's definitely a constriction for many people on many levels, we have to understand what is the purpose of a constriction. Constriction is to allow us to come to new realities. And I do believe that you're going to see, and you're already seeing in different segments of the world, that it is forcing people to rethink certain things, do things differently, look at their reality in a different way, approach things in a new way, a new paradigm, and that the constriction leads to new birth, new realities. And of course, it is up to us as individuals to try to seize those opportunities, but understand that is its purpose. A global constriction is there to give birth to something greater, to something more. That is the way that the world works. That's the way God created the world. First constriction, then comes the light. Okay, hope everyone has a wonderful week. Lots of blessing and success in all your endeavors. And maybe we see less constriction and more light. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.